Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. China has another dubious first to its name, the first country in the world to welcome a Taliban ambassador. That's de facto recognition of the Taliban regime. But why is Beijing doing it? What is their endgame? We'll bring you the full story. Also an exclusive interview. This morning I spoke to the President of Kenya. He was on a state visit to India. He spoke about Prime Minister Modi's leadership of his country and the Global South, and why India, the India growth model, is inspiring the developing world. A shocker from the United States. Leaders of top colleges are defending calls for a genocide and justifying anti-Semitism. It is so outrageous you'd think it's fake, but it's not. Also, US citizen and Khalistani terrorist Pannu is threatening India again. Will Washington do something about terrorists operating on its soil? Russian President Putin is visiting the UAE and Saudi Arabia. We'll bring you the highlights. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak faces a revolt over his Rwanda plan. We'll tell you why. Indonesia wanted to release millions of special mosquitoes, but is rethinking the plan. And the WHO wants higher taxes on alcohol and sugary drinks. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Big blow to Beijing. Italy withdraws from China's Belt and Road project. In 2019, Rome became the only G7 nation to sign up for it. Reports say the long-anticipated decision has been communicated to Beijing. India's stock market crosses a key milestone. Its value tops $4 trillion for the first time. India is the world's fifth biggest equity market. It is rapidly narrowing the gap with Hong Kong, which is in a slump. After China, Moody's downgrades Hong Kong. The agency cut Hong Kong's credit rating outlook to negative from stable. Close links with Beijing are the reason for the downgrade. This is the first time Hong Kong has lost its stable rating outlook since January 2020. Boris Johnson apologizes to the families of COVID-19 victims in the UK. The former Prime Minister also admitted that he made mistakes during the Wuhan virus pandemic. He's appearing at a public inquiry into his government's handling of COVID. Last year, he was forced out of office over lockdown breaching parties at Downing Street. Uganda slams the United States, accusing Washington of pushing its LGBTQ agenda. The US has expanded visa restrictions against Ugandan officials implementing the anti-gay law. Uganda has one of the world's harshest anti-gay laws, which carries the death penalty. Good news for K-pop fans. Blackpink sign a new contract, which means the K-pop group will stay together. Extended contract negotiations had fueled fears of a split. Blackpink, formed in 2016, are the world's biggest K-pop girl group. China is making a power move in Afghanistan. A few days back, Beijing welcomed this man. His name is Bilal Karimi. He is a former spokesperson of the Taliban regime, and now he has a new assignment. Karimi is Taliban's ambassador to China. That's him with the Chinese diplomat. There was a ceremony of sorts a few days back where Bilal Karimi presented his credentials. The Taliban says it is upgrading ties with China, taking steps towards formal recognition. Does this make China the first country to officially recognize the Taliban regime in Afghanistan? Well, Beijing is choosing its words carefully.
China always believes that Afghanistan should not be excluded from the international community. At the same time, we expect Afghanistan to further respond to the expectations of the international community.
China did not say it, but ask any diplomat and this is what they'll tell you. Accepting a diplomat's credentials is as good as formal recognition. But what's in it for China? Why would they do it? Like I said, it's a power move, a strategic investment. Let me explain this. Earlier, China said it won't interfere in Afghanistan. This country is called the graveyard of empires for a reason. But now Beijing is changing its approach. In September, China sent an ambassador to Kabul, and now the Taliban have an ambassador in Beijing. All signs point to one direction: formal recognition of the Taliban regime. China is laying the groundwork for it. It recognizes the new reality. The Taliban rule Afghanistan, whether the world likes it or not. So if you want to have anything to do with Afghanistan, you will have to deal with the Taliban. And it seems China is prepared to do that now. To become the first country to recognize the Taliban regime, they're the first to have welcomed a Taliban ambassador. Not even Pakistan has done it. Although some countries do have diplomatic missions controlled by the Taliban. There are 14 such missions in countries like Iran, Turkey, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and some Arab and African nations. But none of them have a Taliban ambassador. The heads of these missions are called chargés d'affaires. This is a French term. It means charged with business. And this is the lowest rank of diplomatic representation. A chargé steps in when the ambassador is away or their appointment is awaited. Basically, they fill in for the ambassador. Now, these titles also have symbolic significance. Recognizing an ambassador means acknowledging a government's authority. And that's what China is doing with Kabul, accepting that the Taliban controls Afghanistan. But why do it now? Because China, too, is chasing some sort of recognition, not for its diplomats so much, but its interests. And what are China's interests in Afghanistan? Economic and strategic. Afghanistan is rich in natural resources, including oil reserves and valuable minerals like lithium and copper, and China wants access to them. It is already making big investments. In January this year, it signed a deal with Kabul to explore and develop oil reserves. The deal is worth $450 million. In April, China signed another deal for Afghanistan's lithium reserves. Do you know how much China is willing to pay for that? A whopping $10 billion. Years ago, China also secured access to copper reserves. This was in the year 2007. Beijing signed an agreement to mine copper in Afghanistan. It was a $3 billion contract. But the venture hit a dead end due to war. Now is their chance to revive it. And the Taliban would be happy to facilitate. They also want to join China's Belt and Road project. Listen to this.
We requested China to allow us to be a part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and the Belt and Road Initiative, and the path that joins us through Tajikistan.
The Taliban now have an ambassador in China. Expect him to bring this up again. So there is significant money at stake. And as always, conditions apply. Chinese investments come with strings attached. They have deeper ambitions in Afghanistan, and this goes way beyond natural resources. China has been trying to secure a military foothold. Before the Taliban's takeover, Beijing helped Kabul build a military base. It funded a mountain security force. It was based in Afghanistan's Badakhshan province. And in the past, locals have seen Chinese soldiers patrolling inside Afghanistan. Expect China to ramp up these operations now. Their investments can open doors to more military engagements. And we know the US has tried it too. It tried to buy stability in Afghanistan. The plan backfired rather horribly. And now we have the Chinese there. Xi Jinping claims to be a student of history. He doesn't seem to have read Afghanistan carefully. And now to a Vantage exclusive. Kenyan President William Ruto was on a 3-day state visit to India, his first trip to the country as president. Before he left for home, we sat down for an interview, and he spoke about a whole lot of things. His equation with Prime Minister Modi, whom he calls inspirational and progressive, his views on terrorism from neighboring countries, on the Indian model of growth and why the developing world wants to emulate it, on de-dollarization and currency diversification, on the need for a new global financial architecture and a more democratic United Nations Security Council. Also why Africa now wants to write its own story and engage with the world as a partner for investment, not aid or donation. As you can tell, we covered a lot of ground. Here's a part of that conversation. President Ruto, welcome to India. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thank you very much for... It was a wonderful visit to India, and I'm truly grateful to the government, people, Prime Minister, President of India for receiving me and for all the conversations we've had and all the discussions that we've had. And I am very confident that it's going to be a new chapter in India-Kenya relations.
Tell me about your conversations and meeting with Prime Minister Modi. What is your equation with him?
We had a wonderful conversation with Prime Minister Modi. I have a lot of admiration for Prime Minister Modi, the way he has managed to pick up India and the way he is focused on matters that affect common people, and the way he believes, like me, in bottom up, trying to do what benefits the majority of citizens. And India has made huge strides in making sure that they can deliver government service efficiently, cost effectively, and also eliminating bureaucracy and pilferage and corruption. That is precisely what I want to do in Kenya. When I consulted many professionals, they told me the place with the best tested system is India. And so we are using the Indian experience in our digitization of government service, in our unique personal identifier, the same way you have it here in India. I had a wonderful experience with Prime Minister Modi. And as I told you, he's a great inspiration on what he does. And of course, I was asking him, well, it's tough, doing things for 50 million people. I don't know how he does for 1.4 billion. It's quite something.
Why did he tell you that? The answer to that?
He gave me some tips, not for the media.
Not for the media?
Yes.
A few decades back, the developing world was looking at Western models of development and of growth that were to be emulated. Do you think that now the India model is something that countries like Kenya and others resonate with more?
Well, we all share the same history. India was a British colony just like Kenya. And India was lucky to have made strides ahead of us. And so there is a lot of commonality. And in fact, that's what I was saying yesterday. There is a lot of commonality between India and Kenya. It's easier for us to work with Indian experience because we can relate to it. Yes, it is much more comparable. It's much more easy to learn from what India has done. And we are sharing experience. There are a few things India will learn from Kenya as we make this journey.
I'm sure. One of the key announcements yesterday was about fighting terrorism and defense forces of both countries coming together. And that's a very, very important subject for India because we've been at the receiving end of state-sponsored terrorism from a neighbor that was not just supported but also funded, first by the US and now by China. Do you think the international community needs to do more to call out such actors?
Terrorism is a global phenomenon, and it's a crisis that affects many parts of the world. The same way India has suffered terrorism, we too have. We have neighbors that have serious challenges of terrorist groups in Somalia, in various parts of our region. It's necessary that we build a coalition of countries so that we share experience, we share intelligence, we share information, we collaborate, we synergize so that we can deal with terrorism, because terrorism has no borders.
Prime Minister Modi and India were instrumental in getting the African Union into the G20. Is that something that you discussed? And do you think that is one way to sort of get the proper representation that Africa deserves?
That's correct. In fact, I did commend my brother Prime Minister Modi for his efforts in championing the place of Global South, and specifically the place of Africa in the global geopolitics. It is here in India that Africa got the opportunity to be a permanent member of the G20. And we believe that that positioning is going to not only bring voice, but African perspective into the conversation.
You mentioned the global financial architecture, and from the joint statement I see that it mentioned a project financing in Kenya in Indian rupees. There's been a lot of talk of that as well, of de-dollarization. Do you see a future not very far away, devoid of the hegemony of the US dollar?
I think what we must not bring an us versus them, these versus the other. We have no problem with the US dollar. But we want currency neutral trade, We want to diversify currency. For example, for us in Africa, we are working with the Afri-Exim Bank to have a pan-African payment and settlement system where trade in Africa will be in local currency. But the settlement can be done at a higher level by a centralized system. AfriExim is providing a facility because we lose about $5 billion every year in Africa just in exchange rates between this currency and this currency and the dollar, this currency and the other one. So we are saying we want trade, we want commerce, we want transactions to be currency neutral. For us, we want to trade in our local currencies. And in fact, the conversation I was having yesterday with Prime Minister Modi is that even the facility that will be extended to Kenya, the $250 million facility, we want it in Indian rupees so that we can, why should we go and look for dollars when we can have the facility in Indian rupees? We have a lot of trade, we have commodities we buy in Indian rupees. Why should we change Kenya shilling to US dollar, from US dollar to Indian rupees? Why don't we just agree that we can do trade between Kenya in shillings and in rupees? So this is what the conversation we are having.
You recently also said that the world is now looking at Africa as an opportunity and not as a source of problems. And we see the growing interest. There are European players like France, there's the US, there's China, there's Russia. Do you also then see a new scramble for Africa sort of taking shape?
Scramble would be the wrong word. Maybe a new focus. What we are saying as African leaders is, and I will tell you what I have said often, that there is an African proverb that says, until the lion learned to write his own story, all stories glorified the hunter because he was the one writing. So this time round, we're going to write our own story. For a long time, people wrote stories about Africa, and they said Africa is a place of disease, poverty, conflict, problems. We're telling them Africa is much more than that.
We have millions of viewers in Kenya, and it is going to them, and I cannot let you go without asking you about the role of Indians in Kenya in cementing this relationship between the two countries. That is my final question.
We have a great Indian diaspora in Kenya. They have worked with us since 1911. They came to build the railway, and they found that there was a great place to stay. So they chose to stay with us in Kenya. They bring on board the diversity of Kenya, and today they stopped being Indians. They are now Kenya's 44th tribe, and they are perfectly Kenyan with us. And they've been a great bridge between India and Kenya.
Some of them are friends and they call Kenya home.
Yes.
So I've heard great things, but thank you so much for your time, President Ruto. I know you've been pressed for time, but you've made time for us, and it's been a great conversation.
Thank you very much, my dear.
Here's a simple question for you. Is calling for genocide wrong? Do you think it violates normal conduct and rules? It's a no-brainer because the answer is yes. But not for those leading top American colleges, the presidents at top US institutions. We're talking about the so-called best of the best, Harvard, MIT, and University of Pennsylvania. Two of them are Ivy League colleges. The third is the gold standard on technology and science. But on human decency, all of them fail. On Tuesday, the presidents of these colleges appeared in the US Congress. It was an open hearing. American lawmakers questioned them on anti-Semitism. Pretty straightforward, right? Just say it's wrong. Anti-Semitism is wrong. Promise to crack down and listen to the criticism. Well, you're in for a surprise. Republican lawmaker Elise Stefanik asked all three presidents a very simple question, the one that I asked you at the start. Does calling for genocide of Jews violate your college's code of conduct on bullying or harassment? Listen to the answers.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Yes or no? Calling for the genocide of Jews does not constitute bullying and harassment?
I have not heard calling for the genocide for Jews on our campus.
But you've heard chants for intifada.
I've heard chants, which can be anti-Semitic depending on the context, when calling for the elimination of the Jewish people.
That was the president of MIT. She began teaching in the 1990s. I'm sure she has set many question papers for her students. I'm sure she also knows what a yes or no question is. Well, this was one of them, and the right answer was yes. Calling for genocide does violate rules on harassment. If it doesn't, it should. Instead, the MIT president talked about context, as if any context would make genocide acceptable. And she wasn't alone in doing this. Next up was the president of Harvard. Same question and same lack of answer.
And Dr. Gay, at Harvard, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
What's the context?
Targeted as an individual, targeted at an individual.
It's
severe,
targeted at
pervasive.
Jewish students, Jewish individuals. Do you understand your testimony is dehumanizing them? Do you understand that dehumanization is part of anti-Semitism? I will ask you one more time. Does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Harvard's rules of bullying and harassment, yes or no?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric. When it
And is it
crosses into
anti-Semitic rhetoric?
Anti-Semitic rhetoric, when it crosses into conduct that amounts to bullying, harassment, intimidation, that is actionable conduct, and we do take action.
So the answer is yes, that calling for the genocide of Jews violates Harvard Code of Conduct, correct?
Again, it depends on the context.
It does not depend on the context. The answer is yes, and this is why you should resign. These are unacceptable answers across the board.
To give you some context, Harvard is currently being investigated by the US Department of Education. Why? Because of rising anti-Semitism. Let me tell you how bad it is. After the Hamas attack on October 7th, Harvard students wrote a letter, around 34 of them. They wrote a letter, 34 students, and guess who they blamed for the attack? Israel. The students made no mention of Hamas. Instead, they blamed Israel's past actions for the attack. Tells you how bad things are. And finally, it was a third college president's turn from the University of Pennsylvania. Same question, listen to the answer.
Ms. McGill, at Penn, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Yes or no?
If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
I am asking specifically calling for the genocide of Jews. Does that constitute bullying or harassment?
If it is directed and severe or pervasive, it is harassment.
So the answer is yes.
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman.
So is your testimony that you will not answer yes?
If it if the
Yes
speech
or no?
becomes if the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment. Yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide?
Long, winding answers, that too for a simple question. It tells you what the problem is. A rot in the leadership. Teachers at US colleges have been far from neutral. I'll tell you about two instances. One at Yale, the other at Stanford. In Stanford, a professor pulled up Jewish students. He made them stand in a corner. He then said, "This is what Israel does to Palestine." He also called an Israeli student a colonizer. In Yale, things went one step further. A professor said, "Settlers are not civilians, so I guess their lives do not matter." And Yale's response was even worse. They called it freedom of expression. So faculty is clearly part of the problem here, and beyond that, maybe foreign funding. A report came out recently, talks about Gulf money coming into American colleges, specifically from Qatar. It began after the 9/11 attacks in 2001. Since then, Qatar has given $4.7 billion to American colleges. That's around $200 million every year. And with money comes influence. In 2020, a Jewish group tried to study this influence to see how Qatari money is affecting American colleges. Do you know what they found? Wherever Qatar pumped in money, one group was actively present. SJP, that's the Students for Justice in Palestine. They've been holding rallies across American colleges. Some of them have glorified Hamas. So could there be a link between foreign funding and anti-Semitism? It's hard to rule out. After all, Qatar is the biggest supporter of Hamas. And whatever the reason for anti-Semitism, action is needed because colleges are supposed to be safe spaces, places of discussion, not discrimination. But right now, Jewish students do not feel safe. Here's what a poll found. Around 73% of Jewish students have experienced anti-Semitism this year. 73% this year. Things have only gotten worse after the October 7th attack. Before the attack, 65% of them felt welcomed at their college. After the attack, just 44% felt that way, welcomed at their college. Same with physical safety. Before the attack, 67% Jewish students felt safe. Now, only 46%. And we don't blame them. You have college presidents ignoring calls for genocide in the US Congress. If this is not anti-Semitism, if this is not moral bankruptcy, I don't know what is. The US is not just ignoring anti-Semitism, it is also ignoring anti-India campaigns. Once again, from this man, Gurpatwant Singh Pannu, aka America's favorite Khalistani. This time, he is threatening to attack the Indian Parliament. And he's also given a date for it, December 13th. It's the anniversary of the 2001 Parliament attack in India. Pannu is threatening a repeat. He's released a new video. It features the 2001 attack convict, Afzal Guru. In this video, Pannu says two things. One, he accuses the Indian Prime Minister of trying to kill him. And two, he talks about shaking the Indian Parliament's foundations. Indian officials are taking this very seriously. The Delhi police is on high alert. Extra security will now be deployed in the city. As you know, the Parliament's winter session began this week. It will continue until the 22nd of December. So until then, security officials will be on their toes. Of course, Pannu has done this before. Last month, he threatened to bomb Air India flights. He said the airline will not be allowed to operate anywhere in the world. So that's two threats in 1 month. First, against Air India, the second against India's parliament. And what is the US government doing about it? We ask because Pannu is a US citizen. He lives in the US, he works in the US, and he threatens India from the US. So what is Washington doing about it? Nothing. Instead of taking action against him, they're protecting him. And I mean it quite literally. The US recently accused an Indian national of trying to kill Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. They also say an Indian government officer was involved in this plot. New Delhi calls it a matter of concern. It has also started a high-level investigation. So to recap, the US accused India of something. India started investigating. That's what responsible countries do. But when will the US start to investigate? Pannu is a designated terrorist by India. His organization Seeks for Justice is banned. Here in India, there are more than a dozen cases against him, 3 of them for sedition. And Indian officials have plenty of dirt on him. Separatist content on social media, funding anti-India campaigns, and of course, the video messages and threats. But how many investigations has the US done? 0. They're more interested in shielding him. This week, America's Deputy National Security Advisor visited India. His name is John Feiner. He had multiple meetings in New Delhi with Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar, with National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and his Deputy Vikram Misri. As expected, he raised the Pannu assassination plot. He said it's important to hold people accountable. But unlike Canada, the US is not pushing India. They're waiting for India's investigation to conclude.
The Secretary of State has raised this directly with his foreign counterpart, that we take this issue very seriously. They told us they would conduct an investigation. They have publicly announced an investigation, and now we'll wait to see the results of the investigation, but it's something we take very seriously.
The double standard is obvious. Imagine if the situation was flipped. What if someone in West Asia or Africa threatened to attack the US Congress or American flights, or threatened to break the US apart? What would be Joe Biden's response? The drones would be taking off in no time. They would bomb a country over something like this. But for Pannu, it's the red carpet. It's political and judicial protection. Now let's talk about West Asia. Russian President Vladimir Putin is visiting the region. For the West, Putin still remains enemy number one, but for West Asia, he's a friend. And this was obvious when he landed in the UAE. Take a look at this. A ceremonial flypast, a camel cavalry procession, a gun salute and an escort by 4 Russian jets. Putin got the full royal treatment. The West has tried to isolate him, but this visit demonstrates the relevance of Putin. He remains an important player, a geopolitical force to reckon with, and the Russian president is making the most of this opportunity to prove it. He's on a one-day trip to 2 countries, the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and he enjoys close ties with both these kingdoms. Russia is a major producer of oil. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are among the world's biggest exporters, and that creates a lot of synergies. After invading Ukraine, Putin has leaned on these West Asian powers. They have refused to side with the West. The US wanted Russia out of the global energy markets. Saudi Arabia blocked that move. What about the UAE? It has become critical for the Russian economy, the UAE. It is now a key hub to trade Russian oil, to transfer payments, and to bypass Western sanctions. In Abu Dhabi, Putin hailed this cooperation.
Today, thanks to your position, our relations have reached an unprecedented high level. Indeed, the United Arab Emirates is Russia's main trading partner in the Arab world.
The Russian president is not traveling alone. High-ranking officials from Moscow are part of his delegation. This includes the Russian central bank chief, Russia's deputy prime minister, and the trade minister. Putin has brought energy executives as well. Russia's top energy companies are represented, so the mission is quite clear: to prop up oil prices. They have fallen to a near 5-month low, and this does not suit the oil-producing countries. Together, they form a cartel called OPEC+. OPEC is an alliance of major oil producers. It has 13 members. Its extension, OPEC Plus, has 23 members. And Russia is part of this extension. OPEC Plus supplies 40% of the world's oil needs. They meet on a regular basis. They discuss how much oil they should sell to the world. OPEC and OPEC Plus are pushing for production cuts. The aim is to reduce supply to the market to create a shortage, in the hope that it will increase prices. Needless to say, Putin would want to have a word about that. So oil is very much on top of the agenda, but there is more to this visit. Like Israel's war on Hamas, the Russian president wants to weigh in.
Of course, we will discuss with you the situation in the hottest spots. First of all, of course, in the Arab-Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Why is Putin wading into this conflict? Because of Hamas. They have deep ties with Russia. Hamas frequently sends delegations to Moscow. One delegation visited in the month of October, some 3 weeks after the attack, right after Israel began its ground operation in Gaza. And what were those talks about? The release of hostages. Weeks later, that did happen. There was a ceasefire for a few days, but now the fighting has resumed. And so far, Qatar has been speaking to all sides. It brokered the last ceasefire. So will Russia be next? Would Putin like to mediate in this war, even as he's fighting another one himself? Well, invading other countries never disqualified America from mediation, so I guess why not? Russia has little to lose. And this may come up for discussion in his next meeting, the one between Putin and MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, as we know, is Putin's next stop. The Kremlin has already announced the agenda. The statement says the leaders will, and I'm quoting, consider ways to promote de-escalation in Gaza. We'll be waiting for the outcome, and we'll keep you posted. In the UK, a rebellion is brewing. More than 100 lawmakers are opposing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. These are MPs from his own party. And what's their grievance? His Rwanda migration law. It's like a bad habit for London. They can't seem to abandon it. Last month, the UK's Supreme Court scrapped this plan. They called it unlawful. Most leaders would have accepted the defeat, but not Rishi Sunak. He decided to sign a new deal. His Home Secretary travelled to Rwanda yesterday and he signed another agreement with the government there. The hope is this will satisfy the courts in London. And how is that? Because Sunak is also working on Plan B, an emergency bill to deal with the court's concerns. Like, will the migrants be treated well? Will the UK pay for this process? And will Rwanda be safe for them? The opposition does not think so. Just a short while back, Labour leader Keir Starmer raised some important questions in Parliament. This is what he said.
When we send people there under this treaty, we have to pay for their accommodation and their upkeep for 5 years. And that's not all. This morning, a government minister admitted that anyone we send to Rwanda who commits a crime can be returned to us.
This about is ensuring that the concerns of the Supreme Court have all been addressed in a legally binding treaty that will allow us to operationalise the scheme. But I'm glad he raised the topic of legal migration, which I agree is absolutely far too high, Madam Deputy Speaker. That's why this week we've outlined a plan bigger than any other government before to reduce the levels of legal migration.
Which brings us to the party rebellion. There are two Tory camps right now. One is the hard right. They want Rishi Sunak's bill to sidestep human rights obligations, specifically two of them, the UK's Human Rights Act and the European Convention on Human Rights. Tory hardliners want Prime Minister Sunak to ignore these obligations. This is the hard right camp. This is led by Sunak's former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. She would love to humiliate the Prime Minister. After all, he was the one who fired her. The second camp is more centrist. They say human rights is a red line, and this group is made up of the One Nation caucus. It has 106 Conservative MPs. They won't support any effort to dilute or ignore human rights. So Prime Minister Sunak has a tough choice. Reports say he could introduce the bill this week. Once he does, it's up to the MPs. His party's working majority is 56. If either of the camps gang up, he could lose the vote. And it would be his second loss as Prime Minister. The first came earlier this week. Around 30 Tory MPs joined the opposition. They agreed to set up a compensation board in an infected blood scandal. The case dates back to the late 1970s and 80s. Rishi Sunak lost that vote. And days later, he faces his second defeat. So what's his strategy? Reports say Sunak's bill will strike a middle path, something that will appease both sides. It's a do-or-die move. You see, migration was the big Tory promise in the 2019 election. They promised to bring it down below 250,000. Below 250,000 per year. That's the number they promised. And what is it right now? More than 745,000. So forget keeping the promise. The Tories have tripled the migration numbers, which is why Rishi Sunak is betting on the Rwanda plan. He needs those flights to take off. It's probably his last gamble. Because if the elections are held today, the Tories will lose. In fact, why today? Any time in the future, they will most likely lose. The Labour Party has a 20-point lead on the Tories. It's just a question of when the election is held. The deadline is January 2025, but Sunak is unlikely to wait that long. Reports say he will call for an early election next year, maybe in the month of May or November. Those are the two dates being mentioned. Now, Rishi Sunak will be hoping to make some ground by then, to narrow the gap with Labour. But honestly, the forecast looks worse. The UK's economy is expected to grow by 0.7% next year. To give you some context, the US is expected to grow by 1.5%, the European Union by 1.3%. So the UK is lagging behind, 0.7%. Plus, people are facing a cash crunch. Since the Second World War, every government has managed to increase household income in Britain. Every government except this one. Since 2019, household income has fallen by 3.1%. So the writing is very much on the wall. Every opinion poll has Labour sweeping the next election. For the Tories, it's more about damage control now. And for Rishi Sunak, it's about saving face. He's already called the unelected Prime Minister. If he leads the Tories to a rout, his legacy would be tarnished forever. Have you watched the blockbuster Jurassic Park? If you haven't, the plot is quite simple. A theme park creates dinosaurs using prehistoric DNA. And they assure everyone that the facility is safe, except it isn't. Eventually, the ferocious predators break free and go on a hunt, true to their nature. Now, a similar plot could play out soon, not with dinos, but mosquitoes. Scientists have created a new breed of mosquitoes. They can block the growth of viruses like dengue. Indonesia wanted to release 200 million of these special mosquitoes across its cities, but suddenly the government has swatted this buzzworthy plan. Our next report tells you why.
Global dengue infections are on the rise. Half of the world's population is at risk. Anywhere between 100 to 400 million infections are reported every year. The situation is grave, but Indonesia believes it has just the solution. It has created its own army of mosquitoes. Researchers in Indonesia have found a way to fight disease-bearing mosquitoes by breeding special mosquitoes of their own, which will carry a particular kind of bacteria called Wolbachia. This is a common bacteria. It occurs in about 60% of insect species, from fruit flies to moths and even butterflies. But it's not found in dengue-carrying mosquitoes. And guess what? This is just the bacteria to stop them. Wolbachia can reduce the growth of viruses like dengue, Zika and yellow fever in mosquitoes, which can prevent the spread of these viruses to people. So how are scientists creating these special mosquitoes? They are injecting common mosquitoes with the bacteria. When the Wolbachia-carrying mosquitoes breed with regular mosquitoes, they will pass on the bacteria. This study began in 2011. By 2021, it had achieved fruitful results.
The result is fantastic because we were able to reduce 77% of dengue incidents in the area with Wolbachia intervention compared to the control areas. And what is even more interesting is that hospitalization was also decreased by 86%.
So what was the next step? Apparently, releasing millions of these flying insects.
With high acceptance also with the community and the stakeholders, we believe this can be implemented to eliminate dengue and other mosquito-borne diseases in Indonesia.
Looking at the success of the study, Indonesia had planned to release 200 million of these mosquitoes to combat dengue. But now the plan has been put on hold indefinitely due to harsh criticism. For starters, the mosquitoes were tested only on 4,500 people. Critics claim this is not a big enough sample size for a move so significant. What happens if the mosquito bites a person and a new pathogen is created? Kind of like a social experiment gone very wrong. A real-life Jurassic Park, but with insects. Sounds funny, but it could be deadly. Or what if the mosquitoes don't bring any real change, and Indonesia would have 200 million more mosquitoes for no good reason? People also brought up legal reasons from a legal perspective. The state is obliged to protect all Indonesian citizens, not turn them into guinea pigs. For now, Indonesia has swatted the mosquito program. The plan gets points for creativity, but this buzzworthy project needs more work before it can be executed.
Our next story will make you rethink your drink. Thanks to the World Health Organization, it is calling on governments across the world, urging them to increase taxes on two kinds of drinks: alcohol and sugary beverages. This includes carbonated, energy and fruit drinks. And no, the WHO is not a temperance reformer cult, nor is it campaigning for a farce shortcut. So why does it want governments to raise taxes? We'll tell you, but first, let's address the elephant in the room. Do taxes even reduce consumption? Research has an unequivocal answer: yes. We saw this with tobacco taxes. They obviously increased revenue for the government, but they also had health benefits. Higher prices pushed down cigarette sales. Research says the same will apply to beverage taxes. Higher taxation will reduce the consumption of alcohol and sugary drinks. According to a study, if taxes increase alcohol prices by 50%, 21 million deaths can be averted And about $17 trillion can be generated in additional revenue. 17 trillion. Do you know how much money that is? Take 8 of the world's largest economies, their total government revenue for just 1 year. That's how much. Now, let me give you a practical example. Lithuania raised its alcohol tax in 2017. This increased their alcohol tax revenue, obviously. Also reduced alcohol-related debts. Similar success applies to taxes on sweetened beverages. Researchers have found that with soda taxes, demand for sugary drinks falls by 20% on average. This happened in Berkeley. In 2014, it passed America's first big soda tax. After 3 years, people were consuming half the amount of soda and 29% more water. The soda tax raises about $1.5 million every year. Money that is devoted to health programs there. So the research is quite clear. A higher tax on alcohol and sugary drinks will save lives. Sweetened beverages contribute to 8 million deaths every year due to unhealthy diets. Meanwhile, 2.6 million people die from drinking alcohol every year, which is higher than the annual death toll of HIV/AIDS or car crashes or lung cancer. So the logic is quite simple. 2 birds with 1 stone. Higher taxes save lives and bring in money. But today, these dangerous beverages are not taxed enough. The tax rates are based on a fixed volume of beverages. So unless they are periodically increased, they can quickly lose value because of inflation. And that's exactly what is happening. The average global tax rate is too low right now. 108 nations have imposed taxes on sugary drinks. But the average stands at just 6.6% of the price of soda. It is not making a real dent. Now let's look at alcohol. Tax on the price of most sold beer is 17.2%. For spirits, it's a little over 26%, 26.5% actually. In some European nations, wines are tax-free. So things are not really looking good. Yet taxing alcohol and sweetened drinks is a controversial topic. A common argument is this: taxes punish everyone, even those who do not drink excessively. And that is true. But beverage taxes are structured in a way that people who drink responsibly barely feel it. I'll give an example. Imagine if alcohol tax is increased by 25 cents per drink. With 1 drink a day, that's about $91 more per year. But if you drink heavily, say 10 drinks a day, that's $910 in 1 year. So the one who drinks more pays more. Another argument is this: taxes disproportionately hurt low-income people. Again, this is true too. But they also benefit from it. For instance, in 2014, Mexico passed a nationwide soda tax. Within a year, sugary drink sales fell by 17% in the poorest households, which is good news because the poor are more likely to suffer, both from alcohol-related diseases and soda-related obesity. Out of 2 billion obese people the world over, more than 70% live in low or middle income countries. 70%. So no matter how we look at it, for a change, higher taxes could help. And for our last story, let's talk about roads. I know what you may be thinking. Why must we discuss concrete and asphalt on a Wednesday night? But what if roads became powerhouses, not metaphorically, but literally? It is happening in the city of Detroit. A new road in the city can charge an electric vehicle. Basically, you can charge as you drive. And not just that, you can even park your car and come back to a fully charged battery. Sounds revolutionary. Well, it is. It's the first of its kind in the United States. Can this give the EV revolution a much-needed boost? Our next report tells you.
In the heart of America's Midwest lies Detroit, a city that put America on the wheels. From the assembly lines of Henry Ford to the muscle cars that roared out of Motor City, Detroit stands tall as the birthplace of America's car revolution. Its story is not one of nostalgia. Instead, it's all about reinvention, like this one.
And today, we continue to hold that legacy true, again, with having the launch of the first EV road in the country.
As the world pivots towards sustainable mobility, Detroit once again finds itself at the forefront. The Motor City is embracing the electric future, with both legacy automakers and new players coming together. It's not just a comeback, it's a rebirth. Detroit is now home to the country's first electric car charging road. This road can wirelessly charge an EV, whether it's parked or moving. Now, if you've ever driven an EV, you know the hassles of charging the car, especially the need to stop and charge. So, how will it work when it opens to the public? The electric vehicle will have an approved receiver. The road will have a charging segment, also known as copper inductive charging coils. When the vehicle is over those coils, the road will transfer electricity wirelessly through a magnetic field. That will end up charging the vehicle's battery. It will work regardless of the vehicle's movement, so even if it's parked, it will charge.
This will be revolutionary for electrifying vehicles and really being able to get the benefit to the max. We're going to use this as a springboard to learn and understand how things work, but ultimately, how can we scale this up? How can this eventually be something that we use across the state of Michigan and the United States?
This road may be the first in the United States, but it's a concept that the world is exploring. It's being tested in several countries, like Europe, Israel, and China. But there is one worry. Will you get a jolt of current if you walk on the road? The answer is no, you won't be zapped. It's safe for everyone. If electric vehicles are truly the future, this road will go a long way in shaping the EV revolution. Forget about scenic routes, it's all about the electrifying ones. So buckle up. As long as you're on this road, your electric vehicle will be soaking up energy faster than you can say zap.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In the United States, Netherlands Prime Minister Mark Rutte got the ride of a lifetime. He became the first world leader to ride a self-driving car. In North Korea, Kim Jong-un was seen crying as he asked women to have more babies. And in Peru, it was a lucky escape for some shoppers as a car crashed near the store. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1917, Finland became independent. The country was part of the Russian Empire from the 1800s. It decided to break away after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Differences have only widened since then, with Finland joining NATO this year to ward off the Russian threat. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Would you like to start the ride?
I'm now going to start the ride.
There you
Bye
are.
bye.
Heading to Valley Coffee Company. Please make sure your seatbelt is fastened.
Wow.
For any
It's
questions,
driving.
press the call support button.
It's crazy, right?
It's totally crazy. This is.
걱정을 먼저 생각하는 깨끗한 양심이고 혁명의 미래를 떠매고 나갈 새 세대들의 대오를 튼튼히 꾸리는 데 이바지하려는 숭고한 국민적 자각이라고 하면서 보고자는 이렇듯 고결한 인생관을 지닌 여성들의 어머니의 잡줄기에서 시작된다고 하신 김정은 동지의 말씀을 명심하고 자녀들의 첫째가는 교양자로서의 본분을 다해왔다고 하면서 그는
hasta que no venga este norte para que pueda moverlo. Claro. Tiene que cortar la luz. Sí, sí,